Today we are welcoming Dr. Royce-Ann Collins on the topic of publishing steps for administrators and practitioners. Dr. Royce-Ann Collins is currently an associate professor in the Department of Educational Leadership at Kansas State University. She's an award-winning teacher, scholar, and administrator who devotes her professional life to improving learning opportunities for adult students. She has won multiple awards at the national and regional level, including the 2016 College of Education Michael C. Holland Excellence in Graduate Teaching Award. In 2014, she received the Council for Accelerated Programs Lifetime Achievement Award for her leadership, advocacy, and research on adult learners in higher education, specifically in accelerated formats. Her research interests focus on the adult learner across the themes of assessment, e-learning, and accelerated or intensive program formats. Dr. Collins is a respected professional for her administrative and teaching abilities. She has been active in professional organizations and held many leadership positions. She has also served as chair of other organizations such as the Association for Continuing Higher Education and the Consortium for the Advancement of Adult Higher Education. Dr. Collins continues to lead organizations and has been a member of the Executive Board for the Council of Accelerated Programs since 2007. In addition, she has been the editor of the Journal of Continuing Higher Education since 2013. While well known and awarded for her administrative experience, Dr. Collins is at heart devoted to the art of teaching adult students and providing them the opportunity to learn and improve. So welcome, Dr. Collins.
Thank you, Stephanie, very much for that introduction. It's very kind. Well, welcome, everyone. I hope that you are here and ready to learn about publishing steps for administrators and practitioners. That's really what I'm going to try to help you understand, how you can take your idea and turn it into something that can be published. So let's start with, why would you possibly want to publish? Well, it really does help serve your profession. We need to hear more stories from our continuing educators as to what's going well. You need to share your experience and your knowledge. I go to conferences all the time and I sit through presentations and they're wonderful, new, fresh ideas. And then I try to get people to write them up because that's how everybody else is going to learn about it. And there really are very few writings about best practices when it comes to adult learners in higher education. You can also use it for career advancement, but if you are not even worried about that, what you're doing is you're helping the field and you're helping adult learners, which I think if you're in this particular profession, you probably have a really strong heart in that direction. So where do you start? I would say if you do have a question as I go along, you feel free to put it in the chat session and somebody will pause me and we will take a note as to what those are. I will also take questions at the end. You'll also have my email address, so you can also email me if you have something you want to ask. So let's just start. I'm assuming that most of you are probably administrators or practitioners. So I'm going to start with this best practice idea. And what you want to think about is, what have you done new lately? So some people have created a new partnership. I've heard that. Marketing strategies are really popular. What are you doing to market your programs? We're all trying to figure that one out. Maybe you have come up with a new way of assessing your recruiting process, because we're all into program outcomes, not only in our learning, but in our administration and our programs. Perhaps you've done a survey of your students or your faculty and thinking about maybe grade inflation. Maybe you're asking your adjuncts, what do they need to know more about? Maybe you're just getting some ideas from people. And maybe you have figured out how to help multi-campuses communicate with each other. If you do that, please let me know, because I could really hand it over to some people. Could really use that one. So think about, what have you done new? The thing that you want to start with is something that's going to be different. Think about what you're doing, because I know you're doing great things. So first of all, I want you to describe your practice. You can describe it out loud, but then you got to put it in writing. I work with students all the time who say it's in my head, and I say that's fabulous, only nobody can hear it except you. So I really need you to take that, and if you're not a typer, get the pencil and the pad and get it out and start writing. If you're into electronic gadgets, get it out and start writing. Describe it. And once you've written it down, then I want you to hand it over to someone else so that they can read it. It's really important that you share it with someone else to read it, because even when I write things, I leave out little words. I think something's in there and it's not. So give it to someone else. Ask them if they understand it. Ask them what needs to be clarified in this, what would make it understandable. Or if it's a colleague in your office, they might say, you know, you left out this particular idea, which I think is really important. So it's important for you to get some clarification, find out if you have a really good written down what your practice is, what you found, and that's really where you need to start with the first step. Now that you got your idea written down, now I want you to go purchase a style guide. I want you to start with it from the very beginning. The Journal of Continuing Higher Education uses APA. We use the 6th edition. And I cannot stress enough that whatever style guide you're going to be writing, the journal is using, buy a guide. Don't use online resources. They're not comprehensive enough. You're not going to get enough information from them. You may have to use the book and online resources because they sometimes append things online before they put it in print. But it's important that you really do understand what the style guide is and how to use it and how to start with it. APA is not an easy one. We don't use footnotes, we don't use endnotes, we use parenthetical citations. If you're reading it, you'll know it because you're reading along and then you have this long citation list and you think, why is that in the middle of the sentence? Well, they just cited all the sources that they had used, they had read that had something to do with that particular idea. So those sources are in there. And you also want to pick some very strategic sources to include. But first, you just kind of gather everything. So you got your idea, you have your style guide. Now we're going to do some literature search. The important thing here is every article, every manuscript has to be some things from what other people have said. I know that's counterintuitive maybe, but you have to substantiate your story. Yes, you have this great story, you have this great idea, but now you got to get some other people to support it or to help you flesh out that particular idea. So think about what's the topic you just wrote about. Now go to your friendly librarian and do some searches on what's been written about that topic. I just started with the example of Twitter and marketing because social media marketing is something that we're all trying to figure out. I'm always constantly in meetings, it seems like, asking, does anybody know how to do this yet? So I would say go do some searching, and I did some searching on Twitter and higher education and Twitter and continuing education and Twitter and marketing and social presence and marketing, and I looked at educational arena, and you're also going to look at other areas, but one of the things that you want to go off of is if you don't find very many articles, that's actually kind of a good thing. That means there's not a whole lot written about it, and it means your writing, your manuscript is really important. And we really need to hear it, and we need to see it, and we need to know what you are investigating and doing. You always need literature to back up your practice. I've read several manuscripts, and one of the things that they will get told is you need some more literature to back it up, or you need current literature. That's the other thing that's very important. Don't rely on old literature. Things are being written and published practically every day. So you can get some older texts, but cut your parameters down to nothing older than 10 years at the maximum, and try to get the most recent literature to help support your idea, especially if you're dealing with something like Twitter or marketing and social presence and social media. So here's just a few things that I found. I gave you some references there. One of the things I found when just looking this one up, nurse educators are always out in the forefront. I always love them. They're out there publishing about all kinds of things, usually before anyone else is. And they already have Twitter and tweets, and not just their classroom, but in their marketing and keeping students connected, all those types of things. And you also will look and see what other kinds of journals. You'll notice that I got something from Information Systems Education. I also saw some things from Wired and some other information system type journals. So you're not going to be able to keep your search just in education. Widen it out a little bit. The other thing you want to do is you want to find at least 20 sources to get started with your manuscript. You probably won't need all of those when you finally come down to publishing it. You might, but start there, and you also might get some more, because at the end of what these articles, they have a list of their sources. And you know what? I always skim through those and say, who did they cite? Who should I go look for more information? Maybe I can find something from that particular journal, or maybe I can find something more recent from that particular author, or anything like that. So look at who they are citing, and you might be able to get some more sources for your particular piece. But you need some backing up to this, okay? So you also might even need a definition. I found a really great definition in one of these, and she said that Twitter is an online application that is part blog, part social networking site, part cell phone IM tool, okay? So whatever you're doing, you need to define your terms, you need to define what it is, and that's just one example of where you can find a definition for something like this. So now you're reading, you've got some things downloaded, you found some abstracts that you kind of like, so you've got the entire article. The number one rule that I always tell everyone, if you read something, write something down about it. Don't just highlight it and put it to the side. Don't just write in the margins of the manuscript. Write something down. Create an annotated bibliography with your literature. That means you will give the full citation following APA style, so you learn it from the very beginning, and you will then summarize some points. You also might pull out a quote. But what did you learn from what you just read? And what did the author or authors say about that particular topic? You might also look and see if they did a research study. So if they did a research study, who's the population? And what's the results of their research? I encourage people to put together tables in their literature so that you can compare across what's been written about it, especially if it's research. But the authors, when the study was done, who was the population, what kind of instrument did they use, what was their results of their findings. Maybe it's not a research study, maybe it's more of an anecdotal type of article in which it's giving you information and pulling information from other literature. That's certainly all right, but what are they saying and who was saying it? Another type of article that you can write is a literature review. And a literature review is doing this piece. And what you're doing in your manuscript is you're pulling together everything that's been written about that particular topic, and you're going to publish it so that we have this one consolidated place where we can read the trends on that particular topic. Literature reviews are very good to publish, so you can start there as well. But I really like to get some more best practices, which is why I'm really trying to get you to start with your idea or what you're doing. Go find some things that are written about it. Add that to your research. You also need literature on your population. Now, the Journal of Continuing Higher Education is really all about adult learners. While I will use pieces that include traditional learners at times, We try very hard to get pieces that have to do with adult learners, non-traditional. We've also changed the definition of what is non-traditional now and made it broader. It's not just those adult learners that we used to say. It's even the traditional students that are working full-time, traditional age students, maybe I should say it that way, that are working full-time, that are doing and going to school part-time. We've expanded the terminology of non-traditional. So I would also encourage you in your writing not to use the word non-traditional unless you mean that population, and define what you mean by the word non-traditional early in the manuscript. And also, if you're doing adult learners, tell us adult learners. And it's also helpful if you include age groupings, if you can at all, or at least say, you know, in our institution, adult learners are those that are 22 years old and older is what we classify as adult learners, or however you would classify that. Or give the range of your population. I just read one not too long ago that had learners as low as 14 all the way up to 60s. So think about what is your population so you can give us an idea exactly of who you are talking and describing your program about. Find other studies that have supported or ideas that don't. You might even find a theory as you're going along with this. Theories are good to find. Then, now you've got all this literature, now you've read it, you've put together annotated bibliography, and you have written things down, or perhaps you have built that table that I've talked about as far as creating a matrix so you can see the research and how things are in common with different ones. So now I want you to do is I want you to build your outline. You have all these different ideas now. You've read some things. Now what's going to be the big topic? How are you going to make your manuscript flow? It starts with the big idea. So it might be social presence and marketing, down to Twitter, down to what am I doing, down to how social media is changing the way we communicate with each other, okay? So what's the current information that's out there? Maybe it's a problem that we have. We're all out there using social media, but none of us know what we're supposed to be doing with it. So very much include that type of information from the beginning. The other thing you want to think about is that you want to catch my attention real fast in that first paragraph. I want to be interested in your topic. I want to go, I got to learn more about this particular piece. That's how you get readers reading your writing, okay? So then you're going to add your literature because you need to know what that is. And then you need to know what your practice is. What did you do? Did you use a survey? Did you interview some people at your population? Did you implement a new program and so you collaborated with different institutions? Describe what you did, and then what did you learn from it, and how has it possibly changed your practice, okay? So as you're thinking about your topic, outline it. I encourage you to do that for two reasons. Number one, it'll help you flow from topic to topic. You'll have less holes if you can see it in an outlined form. And you will then be able to see if you need to go do some more research in an area, find some more literature to support you, or you need to go find out some information from someone else at your institution to be able to describe your practice better. Maybe you're going to look at what's your strengths and weaknesses of your practice. And if you had to do it over again, what would you change? And then what you want to end with is implications for practice, which means what could somebody else do with this? What would you advise someone else if they were thinking about using Twitter to market their programs? Here are some things that I would suggest that you do, and give them that, okay? So think about what you're going to be able to pull that together. If you're going to do a literature review, and that would be a manuscript that is just a literature review, you have to examine all the literature on the topic. And again, write down everything you read, okay? You really, to do a good literature review, I would say you need to build an annotated bibliography. You need to build that table of what I just talked about of summarizing the different studies. You need to be able to see if they were, what populations they were. You need to be able to see if there was different types of research, quantitative or qualitative, and you need to be able to compare the results so that then you can begin to group the ideas together. When you do a literature review, you're not going to summarize an article in one paragraph and then summarize another article in another paragraph. You're going to weave together those thoughts. What were the themes that were in those articles, and how do they mesh together? Where do they agree with each other so that you can write about that concept and then cite those sources? What kinds of things do they disagree? So you can write down those concepts and ideas and cite there, okay? So when you're doing a literature review, if you're just going to review literature on a topic, then you must be very, very thorough with your review. Really dig deep into what's been written on the topic. You'll probably find more sources than you possibly need, but that's a part of making it a rich, deep literature review for someone. Always keep a list of your references. You know, one of the #1 flaws I find in manuscripts submitted is somebody will cite a source, but it's not in their reference list. Or it's in the reference list, but they never cite it. Or the years don't match between what they cited in the body of the manuscript and what's listed in the references. So make sure you keep a list of everything. Make sure you have every source that you put into the body, you put it in your reference list. APA style does not do bibliography, they do references. That means you don't include anything in your references that you don't cite within the body of the manuscript, okay? But you want to keep a list of everything that you read, just in case you decide to add it to a manuscript. And you don't have to say, wow, I think it's in that pile over there on the floor with a sticky note on it. I'm pretty sure it is. It's too hard to dig those things back out. And that will just delay you finishing the project, okay? So, and I will reiterate again, start with APA and it works out much better in the end because you don't have to translate it. Here's just an outline of a best practices article. So if you're going to do best practices, first of all, you're just going to start with an introduction, give us the overall concept, your idea, your practice, whatever that particular list is. Then you're going to give us the literature. What does literature say about this particular idea? Then you're going to describe your program in detail and how you implemented it. And then you're going to describe what happened as a result of it. And then make sure you have that implications for practice section. You have your conclusion and then your references. One of the things you want to make sure that you do is you tell us something new. If you do your literature search and it confirms what you're doing, then tell us why it would be important for us for this particular manuscript to be added to the body of what could possibly be published about it. Okay? So, how is yours different? What did you do? Is your institution size different? Is your population different? There's a lot of things that could be different, but think about that idea. If you want to do what's called a major article for the journal, they could also be thought of it as a research article. And these, you would have to write an abstract and you would have to include some keywords. You want to make sure your keywords are the ones that are important ideas in your manuscript. The reason for that is those are the words that any library is going to use to search to find your particular article. So the keywords are extremely important, so choose them well. Again, you're going to start with an introduction. You're going to give us the literature review. Then possibly you're going to give us that research design. What were your research questions? Describe your population to us. What was your sample that you got out of that particular population? How did you go about distributing the survey? Did you make sure that you had IRB approval? All of those go into research design and population. And then you're going to give us a section on what are your findings or results. So if you did a survey, maybe you ran some statistical tests and you came up with significance based upon this particular idea or this idea. Or if you're doing interviews, you came up with some different themes from your participants, what they were saying. And then you're going to add a discussion to that where you discuss what your findings are and how it relates back to the literature. Discussion relates back to literature. How does it support or how is it different from the literature? Again, in this particular journal, not in all journals, but in JCHE, we want implications for practice. We want people to translate their research into practice so that we can see how it actually applies. Then we want a conclusion, and then we want our references. So if you, many people try to take their dissertation and move it into a major article. Remember, a dissertation is a completely different animal. It's got a lot of words, and in a major article you have 7,000. That's your max. So what do you want to do with a dissertation if you're mining it for manuscripts? Is to find one important idea. I had a student that did a mixed methods on critical thinking and really has an opportunity for about 2-3 different articles out of it. He could talk about the qualitative results. He could talk about his quantitative results. And he does not have to put those together because they could be pulled out very distinctly because they show important things. He could have done another one on just his literature review. So when you take your dissertation, make sure that you don't take it as a whole. Mine it for what you specifically want to publish from that particular piece. So you can usually get 2 or 3 articles out of it. If you're doing just some research as a part of your practice, I've done a lot of surveys just as a part of my practice. Make sure you have IRB approval before you publish that, but you can certainly publish the results of that, and I think we would find it very fascinating. I've done a lot of studies on retention of adult learners and what works and what doesn't work when I was just looking at my own institution, which then brings that into a research which I have a lot of implications for practice for someone else. Here's some common mistakes that I find in manuscripts that are submitted. People just don't edit well. If you're a writer, find someone else to read it. I will say that again and again, because someone else can see the mistakes that you can't. Many times they just don't follow the right style, and we will send it back to you immediately if we receive a manuscript and it's not an APA. And the guidance will be, once you put it in the correct format, we'll be happy to review it. But we're not going to pay attention to it until it's at least in the right format. The other thing people don't pay attention to is word limits. For the Journal of Continuing Higher Education, the limit is 7,000 words for a major article. That includes your references, that includes the abstract, that includes your keywords, that includes your title, that includes any figures or tables that you want included. So all of that together is what is important to get to that 7,000 words. Now, I can fudge a little bit on that, but I can't take a 10,000 word article. That's too long. The key for that 7,000 is people get tired of reading. And that's really what it is. You've got to capture people within a certain segment of time in which they'll read the whole thing all the way through. On a best practice, the word limit is 4,000, and I would encourage you to get between 3,000 and 4,000 words, because usually if you've written smaller than that, you really haven't fleshed out the literature really well. You have a lot more things that you can add to it. So think about how you can get to that 3,000 words. A lot of times people use too many acronyms. You have a common phrase and so you want to acronym it. Acronyms are actually annoying to readers, especially if they can't remember it and you have several of them in there. And now they've got to thumb back through and go, now where was that defined first? If you use an acronym, then make sure that you've written it out the first time before you ever acronym it. It may be an acronym in your institution, but it doesn't mean it's an acronym in mine. Many people just overuse jargon or technical language, and sometimes I just get best practices that don't include literature, and we have to send it back and say, go find some literature on the topic, then come back to us, then we'll be able to do some things with that and be able to help you expand it. Here's some writing tips. The first thing you want to do is just commit to writing well. And the other thing I want to really stress here is that writing well is really editing well and rewriting and rewriting. I have students that really get tired of that, and I do understand it because I get tired of it myself, but spend several times going through a manuscript yourself and rewording and thinking about how that can flow or how you can say that more concisely. You want to find your ideas and you want to think about what your daily problems are, and you want to come up with a clear purpose for your manuscript. Okay, so have some ideas on how you're clearly going to be putting into this particular manuscript. And I also tell people, if you've not written, spend some time reading what other people have written about the topic, or spend some time reading best practices that have been published in the journal. You can go back, if you're a member of ACHE, you have electronic access to the journal, and you can do a sort on any kind of topic that you want to just look at, see what's been written on that topic. You can do a sort on best practices. So go read how they've been written up before. Go try to understand new ways of looking at that particular problem. And you also might find some sources that you can add to your literature. So spend some time reading what it sounds like when you publish a best practice. The other thing that people don't do is they don't write an introductory section that just really grabs the reader. Even my peer reviewers want to be grabbed. If they write, their first comment is that I really had to make myself read this manuscript. I just struggled to get all the way through it. It's not a good manuscript because they're not interested in the topic, and you've got to grab them. Make them interested. Make them interested in what you're saying. Think about when you want to get your staff interested or your faculty interested. You might start with a story. You might start with a student testimonial. You might grab somebody's attention in that particular fashion. The other thing that I find is that you need to really have a strong ending. What's your conclusion? What is your so what? Wrap it up for people. Your conclusion should pull it all together and tell the reader why this was important and what is the so what of this particular story or this particular best practice. The other thing I find is that you've got to have flow from your paragraphs and ideas. And even within a paragraph, you've got to have flow. You want to be able to write in active voice. Active voice is making the noun do it. You're not doing something to a person, the person is doing it, okay? So most of the time, if you have long, cumbersome sentences, you're writing in passive voice rather than active voice. And if you don't know what that means, or you say, gosh, I don't know if I'm writing that way, take it to your friendly English teacher. That's what their expertise is in, and have them, kind of help you with that. You can always try to do those. You'll also get people changing voice within a paragraph. I encourage you to write in third person, which means you're talking about the person, the individuals, the institution, that phraseology rather than I. If it's a personal story, you can use I or we, but I really strongly encourage you to try to write in third person. It's not necessarily, some writings, some manuscripts can get away in first person, but if you can do it in third, that would be my first recommendation. The other thing would be stay away from that you. Second person you in writing has a tendency to point a finger at the reader, and you don't know how that affects your reader. The other thing that I find when people use second person is they get lost in the you. They will talk about you as the instructor, and then they will transition and they will use you when it really refers to the learner. So you gets very fuzzy. Go back to your noun. Who are you talking about? If you're talking about instructors, say instructors. If you're talking about students, say students. If you're talking about administrators, say administrators. That's how you keep it very clear as to what you're referring to and how to come across in your writing. I think I've said this, but I really will say it again and again. Revising is really, really important. Revise, reread, rework, revise. Have at least 2 other people read it for clarity. People that don't have any idea what you are talking about. Give it to someone else. Perhaps it's a person in your family that say, here, read this and see if you understand what this is. And a rough draft does not equal final copy. I get a lot of rough drafts. That's not your final copy. Make sure that you spend the time reading it, putting it aside, reading it again. Proofreading, you might hand it again to an editor or someone that can look at that. Make sure it's a complete story. The other thing that really helps is if you use co-writers. You have a colleague in your office and you write together, because I find writing together is a lot of fun. I bounce people's ideas off of each other. What I think of, my co-writer may or may not. They have expertise. We can reshape some things based upon what it is. Just make sure it sounds in one voice. I've talked about active voice, so I'm not going to go back to that, but remember, active voice is incredibly important. Don't use too many quotations. Say it in your own words. You can pick your quotations strategically. They are something that you want to bring home that somebody has put into really articulated extremely well. But you don't want very many quotations in your manuscripts. That means you're not doing the writing, someone else is. Avoid using any contractions. Don't, isn't, wasn't. It's just best to leave them out. It helps for clarity. Avoid some slang, colloquialisms, idioms. And I think one of the things that I also want to really stress is the idea of your title. Make a title concise, tell us what it really is, and make it descriptive. If you're using Twitter if you're talking about Twitter in your manuscript, don't say social presence in marketing as your title, because you're not really talking about social presence. Social presence could be Facebook, it could be Twitter, it could be Instagram, it could be just your web. So if you're talking about one specific area, then say Twitter in marketing. Make sure that your title is descriptive of what you're writing about. Now I throw this one in just so you understand the decision-making process. When you submit a manuscript to any kind of journal, it's going to go through a one pass, usually from an assistant, and maybe the editors or a group of editors will read over it as well, and then they'll decide if they are going to send it out for review, if they're interested in the topic, or if it's not a match for that particular journal. If it's not a match for that journal, they will send it back to you and say, you know, you might look for a different journal. Sometimes if I do that, if I can think of other journals that I can suggest that you might consider, I will try to do that as well. The review process is that your manuscript is going to be sent out as a blind review. That's why your manuscript, for us and for all journals, you're going to have your title page and authors on one separate document, and you're going to have your manuscript clean of any author's names or anything of that nature, so that it goes out to reviewers and it's a blind review. Now, if you cited yourself in a manuscript, you don't have to strip those names out. That is not important. Nobody really knows that you're citing yourself. So don't worry about that particular piece, but make it a blind review, as in nobody knows that you just wrote that particular piece. And it'll take maybe 60 days. I've had them take, at other journals, 90 days, 6 months, depending on how fast reviewers get back to them. Peer reviewers are not paid, and so you're hounding them to turn it around in a timely manner. Some work very well, some do not. That's been my experience. So that process is going to take some while. Your editor is going to get it back from the reviewers. There's going to be a conversation perhaps with the reviewers. If there's a huge discrepancy in them, the editor is going to make the final decision on how the decision comes back to you. You will be sent the peer reviewer's comments. Again, it'll be blind review. You won't know who reviewed your manuscript. And you will have comments about their impression of that particular piece. You can get a variety of different answers back. Accept is probably the best thing anybody could ever ask for, but I would tell you I've gotten that in one particular piece that I've ever submitted for publication, an accept from the very beginning. Most of the time you'll get a revise and resubmit. And I have revised and resubmitted a piece for publication 4 times before it got accepted with revisions to be published. So the story behind that is persistence. If you first get revise and resubmit, that means they're interested in the topic. The manuscript isn't in the right shape yet. You've got to do some more work before we can get it to that level. What they're trying to do is, remember that write and rewrite and write and rewrite? That's what revise and resubmit is. It's extending that write and rewrite time frame. So think about it, and I know those comments come back, and even though we try not to make them stinging, they are stinging because it's your personal work and it's your baby, and somebody just told you that you needed this or that, or you needed to do this or that, and it just doesn't make you very happy. Okay? Put it aside, get over the emotions, and go back to it and read it again. Read them carefully and see it as ways to improve your manuscript, okay? Be diplomatic with your responses. When sometimes I get pieces back and people will give me a response to some of the reviewers' comments that they chose not to include, but they must explain why they chose not to do that. If their answer is valid or is reasonable, then we'll probably move forward without that particular idea. If it goes out to review again and the peer reviewers say, no, that really is a valid idea and it really has to be changed, then you may get another revise and resubmit. Once you get to accept, you can get accept with revisions, major or minor. Minor is usually citations, editing, you left out some particular piece. Major is usually you need to rework this section, you need to get up-to-date resources. It means there's a major thing that you've got to spend some time rewriting before we'll accept it for publication, okay? Always remember that everyone is trying to help you improve the piece. That's what all that process is about. You want, once it gets out there, it has your name on it. And you want to be seen in the very best light as possible. So think about, how can I rewrite this to make it the very best possible? And if you get a reject, you have a couple of choices. A reject could be that it's just not written very well and it needs an incredible amount of work. I've gotten pieces where we rejected because they submitted it kind of as a major article, but it worked better as a best practice. We usually tell the person that you could rewrite this as a best practice and it would make a better piece than a major. So it may get rejected. Consider the comments even when you get rejected and think to yourself, okay, what are they saying on how I can improve this? And can I take another run at it and resubmit it? Do I want to take another picture of it? Do I want to twist it in some way using those comments, and maybe I want to submit it back to that journal, or do I want to submit it to another journal? Those are just some types of things that you want to keep in mind as you're going through this process of the peer reviews and getting this particular decision back. Have a clear focus and a vision. Think about what is your best practice and what do I want to do with that, okay? Get some copies of manuscripts, of the manuscript requirements for that journal. Always start with what are the requirements of this journal? I pointed out with our major article we have an abstract and keywords. We do not have that with best practices. So what are the requirements for this particular piece that I'm going to submit? Make sure that you write it real clearly and do that rewriting. Get some colleagues, some people that you trust that's going to give you good constructive feedback. And consider their feedback honestly, openly, process it. I know emotion gets hung up in this. Put it aside if you get overly emotional about it and come back later after you've thought about it a while and can look at it with a different eye. And always send your manuscript to the right journal. Choose a journal that is very much focused on your particular topic and go to that particular journal. And number one is don't panic no matter what the decision is. Don't panic. Don't panic as you're waiting for that review process. Just go on. You've got a lot of busy things to do in your life and a lot of busy things to do in your job. And those are the things that are the most important. Publishing is incredibly important. And I know that you are doing really great things. And what I really hope that you will consider is sharing it with the rest of us. I really do look forward to receiving your manuscripts, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any at this moment.
Yes, Royce-Ann, we have a question from Felicia. She says, is it possible to publish without statistical data? I am researching a topic that does not have any statistical data available, but want to promote awareness around the issue and build a case for the research to be completed.
I would say, well, a couple of things. If you are doing, what I'm taking from this is that you have a piece, you don't have statistical data, but you want more ideas around that. So I would approach it as a literature review. Bring in your literature, bring in the idea, and then talk about some more research that needs to be done in that area. You can certainly add that to a literature review. What types of research needs to be done?
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Anyone?
I'm not seeing any other questions. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. This will be recorded and distributed to you via email, if I'm not mistaken. And again, you can always reach Royce-Ann by her contact information if you have any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Royce-Ann.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.